Beirut is tonight reeling from the impact of a massive Israeli attack on the headquarters of the militant group Hezbollah. The Lebanese capital was hit by a wave of missiles this afternoon in one of the most dangerous escalations in the Middle East to date. According to reports in Israel, the attack was aimed at the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. His fate is not yet known, but the scale of destruction means the casualty rate is likely to be high. The airstrikes came just hours after Benjamin Netanyahu had finished a defiant speech at the UN in which he described the threat posed by Hezbollah as intolerable. He had already signed off on the attack in a New York hotel room before coming to the chamber. It may be Israel's most incendiary act of the past 12 months, described by Iran tonight as a game-changing escalation.
A bombardment on Beirut. As the sun set, the explosions rang out. An ominous indication of escalation.
In the last few minutes, there has been a massive bombardment here on Beirut. It is by far the biggest attack on this country since the end of the war in 2006.
The scale of the attack suggested a target of huge significance. Multi-storey buildings used to stand here. It now seems that target was the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. Israel seeking to destroy their enemy from the very top.
Moments ago, the Israel Defense Forces carried out a precise strike on the central headquarters of the Hezbollah terror organization that served as the epicenter of Hezbollah's terror.
The strikes came immediately after Prime Minister Netanyahu had addressed the United Nations.
Enough is enough.
Vowing to continue his attacks on Hezbollah.
We won't rest until our citizens can return safely to their homes. We will not accept a terror army perched on our northern border, able to perpetrate another October 7th style massacre.
The area hit tonight in Beirut is heavily built up. The southern suburbs are a Hezbollah stronghold and full of homes packed into tight streets. Many residents have left amid repeated Israeli attacks on senior commanders, but it seems impossible that civilians have not been caught up in these blasts. The calculation clearly that one man was worth whatever collateral damage came in the attempt to kill him. Tonight, again, this crisis is escalating. Emma Murphy, News at 10, Beirut.
Well, even before the huge attack in Beirut, Mr Netanyahu's speech at the UN firmly extinguished any hopes of even a temporary ceasefire. Much of his ire was aimed at Tehran, which he accused of masterminding the actions of Hamas and Hezbollah. And with the threat of a regional war tonight greater than ever, he had an ominous warning for Iran that there was no part of the country that Israeli missiles could not reach.
The Israeli Prime Minister arrived at the UN this morning, having given his fateful order to his Air Force to strike at the very heart of Hezbollah. His office even released this picture of him giving the instruction by phone to his military commanders 5,000 miles away.
And invite him to address the Assembly.
And when he entered the General Assembly, with the world not knowing his decision...
Ladies and gentlemen, order!
Dozens of diplomats walked out in protest at Israeli actions in Gaza.
Order, please!
Undeterred and defiant, Benjamin Netanyahu made clear that Israel's fight with Hezbollah was far from over.
I said to the people of Lebanon this week, get out of the death trap that Hezbollah has put you in. Don't let Nasrallah drag Lebanon into the abyss. We're not at war with you. We're at war with Hezbollah, which has hijacked your country and threatens to destroy ours.
He also said that Israel was engaged in a civilizational struggle and issued a clear warning to Iran.
If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach. And that's true of the entire Middle East. Far from being lambs led to the slaughter, Israel's soldiers have fought back with incredible courage and with heroic sacrifice.
Any reaction, sir? Outside, top Arab diplomats rushed to consult with their capitals. And later, the Saudi foreign minister told me that Israeli talk of peace with his country made no sense without a Palestinian state. Do you feel tricked by the Israelis in terms of him referencing Saudi Arabia while also almost simultaneously attacking Beirut?
The guns are not going to solve anything, that we need to move towards a peace in our region, and that peace is firmly rooted in addressing the Palestinian issue.
The Israeli ambassador defended the targeting of central Beirut. How many innocent Lebanese civilians is it worth killing to try and get Hassan Nasrallah?
Well, we are trying to minimize civilian casualties. Unlike Hezbollah, we are doing exactly the opposite. They are launching rockets into our civilian population while hiding behind civilians. They are committing a double war crime.
The people of Israel live now, tomorrow, forever. Thank you.
For Netanyahu, this was an astonishing double act, bombing his enemies and talking to the world at exactly the same time. The Americans insist they were given no advance notification of the strike in Beirut, and their diplomats are in a state of despair. For in his speech here, Benjamin Netanyahu gave no reference at all to Palestinian aspirations for a state of their own. Robert Moore, News at 10 at the United Nations.
Well, in a moment, we'll speak to John in Tel Aviv. We'll first cross, though, to Emma in Beirut, where I know it's very tense there tonight. Emma, hard to overstate the scale of what happened there today. What news, if any, on Hassan Nasrallah? And what's the word on the ground there on how Hezbollah might respond?
Well, there's no confirmation either way at this point, Julie. The Israeli military say that they're studying the scene. They're looking at the information that they have to make a definitive judgment on whether or not their strike was successful in their eyes, and they have killed Hassan Nasrallah. In terms of Hezbollah, there's very little official coming from them. The channels that normally can be used to get information have gone very quiet, which is not necessarily a particularly good sign, but of course there is always the possibility that the chaos of this situation means that nobody is entirely clear. What we do know is that in Iran, the supreme leader has commanded his senior leaders to go to his compound. Very unusual that they're holding an emergency meeting this evening. And in the last few minutes, the Israeli military have just issued an evacuation order for that area just down there behind me. That is the southern suburbs. That's where the first strike took place. And they have warned people they need to leave there, leave certain parts, because they believe that there will be more strikes to come. It is incredibly difficult to know where this goes next. But what I would have to say is that there is no way to overstate the significance of this. Hassan Nasrallah is a huge political and religious figure in this region, and the strike on him will not go without response, irrespective of what the outcome is.
OK, Emma, thank you very much for that. Let's cross then to John in Tel Aviv. As Emma was saying there's no doubt this is a major escalation by Netanyahu, who's flying back to Israel now. What's the reaction been there, and what is the level of fear of retaliation?
Julie, I think what we've seen actually over the last couple of weeks is what the Americans call mission creep. When the government here announced its focus was switching from Gaza to South Lebanon, it said it wanted to enable residents to return to their homes near the border. Now the goals have become much more ambitious. They're out to devastate Hezbollah. It began with attacking foot soldiers via their pagers and radios. Then we had the assassinations up the ranks. Now we've got this attempted decapitation of what is the most capable terrorist enemy that Israel actually has. They are fearful of a response, but they want to re-establish deterrence in this region. Now the Israelis have a choice. Do they keep going with the airstrikes, or do they send in ground forces? Whatever they do, this will go on for the foreseeable future, not least because in 10 days' time, Israelis will mark the first anniversary of October the 7th, the most disastrous security failure in this country's history. Now, Mr. Netanyahu will not want his people to dwell entirely on that failure. He'll want some of their focus to be on a successful military campaign against another archenemy, Hezbollah.
OK, John, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, Rohit's with me here in the studio to talk more about the security questions around this and where this might go next. Now, I mean, it's believed the target of this attack clearly was Hassan Nasrallah. No clarity on what has actually happened to him yet, but irrespective of that, it's the consequences and the fact that all of the Israeli actions have sort of led up to this moment.
Yeah, and we can see this really as being the second phase of a 10-day operation. The first phase being those pager explosions last week. And, you know, what I've been told by senior diplomatic sources in the Israeli security system is that they've been watching Nasrallah's response to this very closely. What they've observed are changes in his behaviour. They believe that he's become lonely. Many of his allies have been killed. His sense of certainty, his sense of being an expert on Israeli behaviour has been completely shaken, first by that pager incident. But then we can look at his speech that came a few days later. And you know, it's been noted that there was a change of tone there. He admitted that this had been a failure. It might have been a sort of slight change of tone, many might have thought, but actually this was really a big shift in the sort of language that Nasrallah traditionally uses. And so now, you know, the diplomatic calculations are incredibly important too, because, you know, how long has this been planned? Well, perhaps for 10 days, but certainly at least for 2 or 3 days. And remember, it was the middle of this week when the Americans thought that they had got the Israelis to agree to a temporary pause in the fighting. And so now one of the big consequences here is that many of Israel's allies seem completely powerless. And interesting to what Emma was saying, that everything from Hezbollah, the normal channels have gone silent. There are conversations at highest levels being had in Iran. Where might it go next? Well, I mean, Iran is where that answer will come from, because, you know, what is undeniable here is that Hezbollah have been hit incredibly hard during the last few days. It has a huge store of ballistic and other forms of missile, but many of those have been wiped out. And so a response now will probably, if it does come, it will come from Tehran.